Welcome to the Arabian Business SME Forum. I'm Scott Armstrong and I'm the Editor-in-Chief of Arabian Business, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this event full of insight, advice and information for the SME sector, described as the economic engine of the Arab world. Innovators, job creators, employees, small and medium-sized enterprises, you are vital. And this event has been born out of many conversations with the business sector amid coronavirus and the pandemic. Now, as we look to put 2020 in the rearview mirror, we examine what the opportunities ahead are in 2021. In our first session, Cashflow is King, we look at financial planning for SMEs and the thorny topic of paying the bills and staying afloat. Then MasterCard joins us for a fireside chat on the opportunities for SMEs in the digital transition. And then in our second panel, Finding New Customers in a Time of Crisis, we look at how marketing and data can help you capture new audiences and new revenue streams. We hope you enjoyed the panelists' contributions as much as I did learning from them. And so, without further ado, here is the Arabian Business SME Forum.
Small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs, according to Saeed Al-Meri, the Deputy CEO of Dubai SME, make up 99% of the UAE's economy. They're the job creators, the sector innovators, the key service providers, and the growth generators for the country. And as such, they are the bedrock of commercial activity. These businesses have also, of course, been the most impacted by coronavirus in 2020, particularly in sectors such as hospitality, travel and tourism, and events. And while the picture remains in a state of flux, it's clear that 2021 will be the start of a post-COVID world, and SMEs will be the engines driving the economy forward. Welcome to the Arabian Business SME Forum, a day of virtual insight designed to offer crucial advice and information on navigating these uncertain times. Hosted with the support of Dubai SME, our first session focuses on money and finance, and I'm delighted to be joined by three illustrious panelists. The first, Marwan Hadi, is Executive Vice President and Head of Retail Banking for Emirates MBD. Scott Cairns is the Managing Director of Creation Business Consultant. And Neelam Keswani is Founder and Managing Director of Glamazzle.com, one of the most successful online beauty shops in the UAE. And I am Scott Armstrong, and I'm the Editor-in-Chief of Arabian Business. So welcome to my panelists today. Thank you for joining me. To start with, I'm going to ask you all to give me a helicopter view of 2020 through the lens of SMEs. How do you think the year was going into the start of the year? Obviously, the impact of COVID. And where do you think the SME sector is right now? And Marwan, can we start with you, please?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Scott, for the introduction. I think if we want to talk about 2020, I'll talk about it in three different quarters because we've just finished three quarters and we're almost halfway through the fourth quarter, but I'll just split it into three sections. I think quarter one started off very well. I think everyone was overall very positive about the economy, the productivity, the activity. We had the expo, which was supposed to be hosted in October, and to be honest, even from a business volume, from our perspective, we had a really amazing start to the year. And I think it was too good to be true that Q2 came in and the pandemic started. And I think Q2 is where it was a big shuffle for everyone. And to be honest, a very difficult time because business activity went from 100% capacity, maybe 110% capacity, to gradually declining to even zero at certain sectors when we went through the full lockdown. And I think that was devastating for many SMEs, and probably seen it go through we've seen it happen with many companies, small companies closing down, especially the ones which tried to overexpand in Q1 given the activities that was there, and used a lot of their cash flow in Q1 to make sure that 2020 was being lined up for a strong year. So it was a very unfortunate quarter two. What I think Q3 has shown us is that, at least in the UAE, we've learned to live with the virus. It's there. Business activity started improving. Cash flow started being generated. Some companies with healthy margin, which manage their cost base very well, are able to sustain at Q3 levels. Q4 continues to be an improvement from Q3, at least the initial start. But I think the plan is that everybody wants to end Q4 strongly, so that 2021 remains to be a strong year. I think 2021 should be a good year overall, but still not to where we would like, or where the business activity was in Q1 of 2020, or even the end of 2019 or the whole of 2019. But the signs are positive. We're seeing PMI growth, we're seeing expenditure coming through, we're seeing FX flows go back to not normal, but to a certain amount of normality. And hopefully over time, I know everyone says that we will see travel and tourism go back to the levels they were maybe by 23, 24. I'd like to be more optimistic about it, because it is really front and center for Dubai and the UAE, to be precise, especially Dubai. As being the capacity that we have is not meant for the local population. It's meant for local and international tourism. And just to give you an example, we're a 9 million population country. We had 13 million visitors the year before. So almost you have double the population when it comes to tourism and the local population. And I hope that by second half of 21, we do see a strong recovery. I think UAE is poised to maybe, and Dubai specifically, is poised to have the strongest recovery across many other geographies in the world. And that's the reason why we have strong cash, which is Emirates. I think the COVID-19 rules as well to enter and exit the country is much more relaxed than other parts of the world. So that should give us a leverage and an edge to make at least Dubai come back to where it was in regards to tourism industry faster than the rest of the world. That's my optimism speaking, and I do believe we have the plans in place, and the country and the leadership have put the plans in place to get to that level. So that's a small summary from where we were. We had a good Q1. COVID hit Q2. It was, I think, the worst quarter in history. Q3, adjustment and learning how to live with the virus, and Q4 to build plans for next year and continue on the recovery journey.
Thanks, Marwan. Scott, I'll bring you in. And Marwan was saying that, like, going into the beginning of the year, almost too good to be true. You were talking previously as well about 2019 being almost like a rock star year. Your thoughts where the SME sector began 2020, and again, what's the journey been there?
So we saw towards the end of 2019, the last quarter, every single month was just bigger than the last. It seemed to be that the market was really growing. Everything was booming. There were so many startups. There were so many people expanding, a lot of FDI coming in. So everything was looking fantastic. And a lot of our clients were then, based on that, projecting 2020 to be fantastic as well. And most people were building in very aggressive expansion plans, us included. And a lot of people we know were looking, especially as a Saudi expansion with all the giga projects there, they were eyeing those markets off. And towards the start of the year, I was in Riyadh. The market there, the feeling was excellent. Everyone was very upbeat about a really good year coming. And then when March came, it just absolutely put the handbrake on everything. And what we saw was everyone who had any type of expansion plan in sort of the end of March, April, everything went on pause. There was just nothing to be done. Everyone I've spoken to, April was probably the worst month that they've seen. But after that, it was quite interesting because most people had got to the point of, well, the world didn't end after a month, and it looks like this COVID's going to be around for a while. We found a lot of people adapting very quickly. And we've got a client who's an online learning client. So they provide online learning services to universities. And I spoke to their CFO around that time and I said, how are things? And he said, look, we're working basically 7 days a week. We can't keep up with demand. They are just going through the roof. So whilst there was definitely a lot of industry sectors really hit hard by it, it really accelerated the growth of some people who were just right place, right time, right industry. And once those guys had sort of consolidated their position, they kept growing. They were still hiring people, expanding, etc. What we really noticed with our other clients was then after a few months, that real pivot towards online business. So those companies who previously maybe had a brick and mortar approach to things, anyone in training or retail, or a lot of the F&B even, were doing home delivery where you even cooked your own food from the restaurants. So people were sort of trying to make the best of a bad situation. So whilst I think a lot of people thought that, COVID was going to be a lot more catastrophic to business, people seem to cope a lot better and adapt a lot faster than I think a lot of people were expecting. And whilst it may not have made the year as amazing as they thought it would be, it certainly softened the blow for what could have happened. So I think that was a real positive that came out of it.
Neelam, you're a business owner and you've gone through that journey this year, sort of fast through the pain. Where are you at now? And is there any key learnings or any key things that you found have kind of helped you get to this point?
So you know what? I think Scott spoke very well about online business. We are an online website, glamazil.com. We've been here for 5 years. 2019, end of 2019, we had massive expansion plans. We were in talk with an investor to get invested. And then come March, it went into a hold and the investors pulled back saying that, listen, we're a little scared just because your industry might not grow, or, you might take a big setback because it's makeup, cosmetics. People are not going to spend on that. However, March, April, May, June were the biggest months that we've ever seen in the last 6 years. We were actually working. I'm a very conscious owner, so I was like, we will not be working every day, but we work twice a week. And I think the 2 days that we worked, we were literally working 14 hours. We were packing 250, 300 orders every time we came into the office. And I was shocked because, I was like, what's happening? But there was a massive shift in purchase. There was a massive, I think a lot of people went into impulse purchasing, and I did see a massive growth. But, there was a great support from the government where the government said, listen, everyone, go online, shop online, pay online. So we took, we started the year strong. And then March, April, May, June was like bang. We were like literally, it was like a black open up, and I was hiring. And I had my friends in the industry and they're like, are you serious? You're hiring people? I'm like, yeah, I need manpower. I need people to come into the office and work. And yeah, it was great. And it's still going. It's still, of course, it's now, plateaued a little bit, but we're still growing month on month. There's just an up, So yeah.
So if you could give fellow SMEs any particular piece of advice from that journey, what would it be?
Be quick. Be very quick at thinking, and always be a very conscious person, because you're not thinking for yourself. You have to think for everybody. You don't need to think of profit, but you need to think of getting the work done in the right way. And that's what I work towards. I asked my team, are you comfortable to work? And they said, we don't mind coming into office twice a week. I made sure they're all traveling in proper taxis. If it needed, we were picking them up, all of that. But I made sure it was only twice a day and everybody was comfortable. We had sanitizers in the office. I made sure there's gloves. Every shipment that went out of the office was sanitized. And we had given every single courier partner of ours a gallon of sanitizer for them to spray it when they collect it and when they're giving it away as well. So, you just got to be conscious, and you need to think very quick, really very quick.
Cool. Thank you for that. Right. So I'm going to move us on now to our next question. And I think it's probably one of the thorniest issues for any SME business or owner: cash flow. The statement I often hear is cash flow is king. If that's the case, what tools do SMEs have to ensure And Scott, I'll start with you, because you were writing in Arabian Business back in May, as lockdown was hitting SMEs hard, that cash flow might lead to a clearing out of SMEs. Did it? What did those who survived get right?
So what we saw was, I think we were partly right with this. We did see a number of liquidations, but in general, they were not companies that had gone bust per se. They were, thankfully, people looking at their group structures and saying, where can we save money? We've got a spare company or a license that basically we don't really need, and we'll close it down. So out of all of the probably 30 liquidations that we saw, there was only one that we actually saw that was a business that actually went out of business. And that was because this guy was in online ticketing, and basically he was selling tickets for events. With no events on, no ticketing business. Whereas the rest of them were just basically restructures where people were just looking to save money. And I think the point got across quite quickly to a lot of the SMEs about their cash flow management, where they needed to be on top of this. And I think the problem that a lot of SMEs faced was, especially according to the 19 results that we had, everyone was doing quite well, so they didn't really need to manage cash flow so well. They always knew that next month was going to be as good as the last month, and so there was always cash to come in. And what we ended up having to work with a lot of people on was, look, you really need at least a 12-week cash flow in front of you. But to be honest, we need to look further than 12 weeks here. We need to probably look about a year. So we ended up advising a lot of people to look a lot further out. And that really, for a lot of clients, that showed a lot of the pitfalls that they're about to face. So it led to them to doing things like cutting back on the non-essential expenditure, entertainment and things like that certainly got pared back. I know that there was, in this marketplace, there were a lot of redundancies made and salary cuts, rent cuts. But what it also meant was people made their companies a lot more efficient. So they were actually cutting back on maybe non-essential things, but still providing the services they needed to clients. And sometimes that meant maybe cutting back on a department, but then outsourcing the service as and when they needed it. And that really meant that they got control of their cash flow, and it put them in a much stronger position. And we're seeing those who started doing this back in May are now in a pretty good and healthy financial position now that the market seems to be turning around, versus those that weren't paying much attention. I think now they've got some big issues.
Marwan, as a bank, what measures were you able to take to assist SMEs? Were there any sort of common mistakes you saw clients making, or were there any particular winning strategies that you saw? And were there tools perhaps that SMEs were unaware of?
So I think just to add to what Scott said, honestly, a lot of SMEs had to see there's one key lesson learned in this crisis is for every company, whenever they start operations or they're in operations, you need to have enough cash flow buffer, or you need to have enough access to cash to make it survive a quite prolonged period of time. I think in the past, many companies would start up and keep 3 months worth of cash flow or 4 months worth of cash flow. It doesn't work anymore. You need at least 6 to 9 months worth of cash flow where you can actually sustain a business. And if you didn't have that cash flow, you really needed to create that cash flow by cutting down expenses and by changing the way you operate, getting rid of unnecessary costs. But what I like during this whole COVID situation, I think as a community, everyone to a certain degree came together. So we saw landlords give rental cuts or waiver for a quarter in certain areas, which is very important because everybody wants to make sure all these SMEs continue because there's a big source of income for everyone. Even us as a bank, we tried our level best to reduce as much a burden to a lot of our SMEs, where we waived a lot of the fees that we usually charge during for a full quarter. We deferred a lot of the loan payments for up to 6 months, sometimes even 9 months for certain SMEs. So we helped them build their cash flows. And to be honest, what we've seen, and you probably see it, that the deposits in the country have increased in the banking sector. That means people and the business community and individuals were all mindful of this cash flow situation, and they all made sure their personal savings and company savings increased so they can survive the prolonged period of low business activity. And I think the ones which did it successfully are the ones which are here and will hopefully stay, because there's no crisis worse than this. At least what I have seen in my 15 years career, I've seen the financial crisis in 2009. I've seen the oil crisis in 2014. This is by far the most catastrophic of them all, because you see a full stop in business activity. Many have survived, and it's just human nature to adapt to the environment. But what's important is that everyone came together as a community to help each other and to make sure most of us survive as we go into the future, because it's only for our own best interest that everyone comes out of this stronger than before.
Just before I come on to Neelam, Marwan, interesting. Should their bank be the first place that small and medium-sized enterprises actually turn to for help? Should they not be afraid of actually asking their banker for help in this situation?
Yeah, they shouldn't be afraid, actually. They should come. I always believe you're better off, especially if you're in a difficult situation and you have a loan payment coming up or a credit card payment coming up, or you have your car loan payment coming up. It's always better to reach out to the bank before you default, just to make sure, because we can always work out a solution. Sometimes, very rarely, you will end up saying no, but if you are with a good history, you do have shown resilience in the past, and you're a loyal customer, we will always support you during this time.
Great. Neelam, you've been in business for nearly 20 years. So what lessons have you learned? I mean, had you learned these kind of lessons that Scott and Marwan are talking about cash flow? Have you learned on the go during this year, or is there any advice that you can give to SMEs about how they should be handling their cash flow?
So, I come from a very traditional way of doing business. I'm a very strong believer. If you're not making profit in the first year, shut down your business and go back, because it's not going to make profit beyond that. So I've, we I don't know if it's great to say this, but we are a profitable company, and I'm very particular about how my cash works. I've always been very conscious. I've always planned in advance, and I have an Excel sheet where I do all my cash flow projections and everything. And so, I'm just very well prepared for the year in advance. So I think that's the reason why, I always say this to people, that please prepare, plan. It's very important to plan your finances. Honestly, I'm born here. I've lived here my life. I've seen quite a lot of downs and ups. And I learned my major learning was in the 2008-2009 crisis, where I actually literally was ready to declare myself bankrupt, and but I rose from it. I worked, my mom taught me a lot of, how you should finance yourself and things, how you should, save for the rainy day. And I think that's very important for all business, especially small businesses, that you need to make sure you always have some cash kept aside for the rainy day. And I think we all saw not a rainy day, but a very stormy, I would say a thunderous day. And, so I think we did very well was because of that. Coming from the banking part of view, we don't bank with an amazing bank like Emirates NBD. Unfortunately, my bank wasn't supporting us in any ways.
Well, maybe now we haven't got an opportunity here, so we'll let you and Marwan take that offline after this SME forum. I'm sure there'll be very favourable rates. Just remember the Arabian Business Commission in that deal. I'll move on, but so Arabian Business asked back in September, what help did SMEs need the most? And the results came back that 50% said a marketing drive, but 26% and 24% said they actually needed either information about government support or information about what advice was there out there, and access to information about financial packages. So 50% about marketing, and then the two other questions were about information and advice. Neelam, as a business owner with ambitious growth plans yourself, How have you found accessing funds or information about the assistance that's been around there this year? Because obviously the government have put in a series of support measures for SMEs. How have you found the information flow, and what can you advise? Are there really good resources that you found that you could advise other SMEs to embrace?
So I think you need to talk to a couple of people from the industry. I had great support from the government. Every time I reached out to someone in the government authority, they came back and said, listen, you can do this, you can do this. This is how you need to work. And these are the few things that you need to follow. That was fantastic. And then I did read about, government giving, bank stimulus to help SMEs. But somehow I felt my business bank did not push it down to us. I never got any kind of financial relief from them. Not that we have any debt from any of the banks. We're completely debt free. But, just those unnecessary banking charges, relationship charges. There was no relationship manager working. You all were on a lockdown. So what were the charges for? And, the most shocking part here is during COVID, my bank did not provide online banking. And I was literally doing my business banking through my own personal finance, and my business partner, even my husband, we were doing it through our personal finance, because there was no online banking, from my bank. And they said that they don't provide SMEs online banking. And not until now, when the crisis is almost over, everything is workable. Now they are saying, okay, we are giving online banking free. But when I was getting checks, I had this big bunch of checks sitting with me to bank as soon as the malls and everything opened, and I could go to a bank to bank it. So, I think that's where the problem was.
It sounds like one of the key learnings you've had in 2020 is change your bank for one that supports businesses. And I won't ask you to name the bank. Let's not do that right now. No, but however, I think we've got a good introduction here. Marwan, from your side of things as the bank, is information almost as valuable as access to funding? Clear information and advice as valuable to SMEs as access to funding?
I think it's very important, because you see a lot of SMEs also depend on government contracts, government tenders. So how do you enter them? I think the information is out there very clear. Government's been putting a lot of emphasis in improving the SME competitiveness environment, and we've seen that come through, and it's one of the KPIs that they track. I've been personally having discussions with the Chamber of Commerce or Dubai Economic Department, and there is a real honest, sincere drive to actually improve the whole market environment and competitiveness of SMEs, looking at the fees that different places charge and how to make it easy to improve. I think before, to set up an SME, you probably needed a full-fledged office, you needed a PO box, and Scott's been a consultant. He knows how difficult it probably was in the past to set up SME, where today you can set up with Flexi Desk, you can do so many different types of licenses which were probably not available in the past. So I think we can see the steps improving. Information, I agree, could be better put out there, but that doesn't mean the facilities are not there. We as a bank try to make sure we engage our customers as much as possible. We created virtual means for our RMs to speak to clients, whether through Microsoft Teams or Zoom or any of the different types of communication, to have that face-to-face interaction, not just in the SME space, but across the bank. Because you realize as markets drop, you have other issues as well, margin calls, things like that. So you need to be even closer with clients than you would during normal days. So I think as much as possible, we also created a dedicated COVID website which shared all the different FAQs, just to make sure clients could reach out and understand what type of different support packages are there. So we made sure as much as we could that information is out there from a dedicated website, from getting our relationship managers into different virtual platforms to be able to have discussions with their customers. And to be honest, we tried to maintain as much branches as we could open during the lockdown, just to make sure people could do their day-to-day banking service.
Scott, as a consultant, I imagine clear information has got to be in your DNA. How have you found the information flow? Because you'll have had perhaps clients asking you for your thoughts and your advice. How have you found the information flow? What have you been saying to your clients? And again, for the SMEs that are tuning in today, any kind of key takeaways or key resources that you can share with them?
Yeah. So what we found was around the sort of March, April time, there was so much noise being put out from everywhere that I think it was very difficult for anyone to get quality information because there was just so much information coming out at once. And I think once the messages started to get a little bit more clear, the government messages came through quite well, and then they were getting disseminated quite well from people as well. So initially there was quite a bit of distraction, I think. But around the sort of towards the end of April, what we found was, the free zones were reacting very quickly with, discounted flexi-desk office rates, setup costs, discounting visas. Dubai economy had discounts on certain things. And there's only so much that government can do to put this out. And if people don't take that information and sort of disseminate it further, there's only so much that can be done. But what we did find was once they were putting that out and it was clearly understood, then there was a plethora of information around things like, your webinars. I've done more webinars this year, I think, than the rest of my life. And Zoom calls, goodness.
Thanks for being in one more.
Yeah, exactly. More than welcome. But things like, LinkedIn, the news publications, obviously Arabian Business, there was always an awful lot of information at people's fingertips. And what we were advising clients to do was, look around, jump on LinkedIn, link up with obviously some sort of industry leaders and experts, get on their mailing lists especially, because often, the government puts the information out, but then it's often service providers will then pick that information up and then ping it out to everyone so that they know what's going on. Especially when there was a lot of information coming around rent reductions. There was a lot of information from law firms around force majeure, around salary decreases, what you can and can't do. Obviously, SMEs were really crying out to find that information. And what we found was, obviously, they were worried about cash flow, so they weren't about to go and spend extortionate or exorbitant legal fees, but they did need to understand what they could and couldn't do. And I think that the law firms did a great job there of putting on a lot of information and free webinars so that people understood where they stood and what they could and couldn't do. So from our perspective, especially until now, it really has improved a lot. And there is so much out there. I mean, the government's very active on things like Twitter. So you will find any latest news coming out on there. And then it doesn't take much to look around and find on LinkedIn or some other sites to find a bit more detail around it.
Thanks for the plug for Arabian Business as well. We're going to continue to try and report on that. You're right as well. Would you also say, because this is a fluid situation this year, isn't it, as well? Because, ArabianBusiness.com, we've had a number of law firms just in the past week, in the past days, kind of unpacking what the new reforms in the UAE mean for the personal reforms. We've seen bankruptcy laws changing. We've seen fresh tranche of support for SMEs and government financing. So is it very much just keep abreast of events, keep checking, keep looking for information, because the information is evolving as the year progresses?
Yeah, and I think that's one of the important things. The UAE is very progressive in that things can change quite quickly from a regulatory point of view. So one of the things we do with our clients is we say to them, we will keep you updated on everything that comes out annually. So if we know something new comes out, like the UBO register or the economic substance that's going to affect them, we'll actively go to them and explain how it applies to them and what they need to do to comply. But even if you don't have someone that's doing that for you, it's not that difficult to be, checking out a few of the mailing lists or like I said, LinkedIn, and seeing these new announcements and then digging around and finding out more information. And I think it's imperative, especially at the moment with so many changes coming, that people really stay on the front foot and keep abreast of all of those changes.
Marwan, all these changes seem to be increasing a sense of confidence in the market. We're looking at sort of Q4, and as you started by saying, well, we're actually kind of halfway through Q4. As businesses and SMEs go into the final straits of 2020, sort of what should they be looking at, and how are you helping the businesses look at 2020, the final things they should be prepared for this year, or how they can set themselves up for success in 2021?
I think one thing very critical as we move into 2020 and 2021 is domestic expenditure is expected to increase as we go into next year, obviously from where we are, and it's going to improve month over month. And most businesses should think how they can make sure they leverage the whole domestic spend piece, especially by if they're not in that area where if they're more in the tourism sector or different sectors, it's how to make sure the domestic piece of the business starts to grow, because that's very critical. What we have seen, especially on the payments platforms that we have, is that domestic expenditure is back to Q1 level. It's the international spending where people traveling out is not there yet. So I see as we cross over into next year, I would expect domestic spending even to be higher than Q4 2019 or even Q1 2020. So that means the level of activity in the market by people in the UAE are going to be much higher, but the total expenditure is less because you obviously don't have the tourist expenditure, and I don't have the exact data points for that, but I'm very confident that the local expenditure will be much higher. So everybody needs to know how to leverage this business opportunity, because this is the key business opportunity. Obviously, e-commerce spending is also at its all-time. It's just exploded since COVID, and it will continue growing. So whoever is in the e-com space is obviously going to benefit. Neelam is smiling, and she's a beneficiary of this. But it's honest, right? You have two key areas of opportunity. One is the e-commerce space, one is the domestic expenditure space, and every business owner today needs to make sure their business model can leverage the opportunities which these two categories create. And if you're not in these two categories, your chances of success going forward will diminish, because I'm being optimistic and saying international spends and tourism will improve at the second half of 2021, but the experts in the tourism industry think it's 2023. So there is, so everybody needs to plan, focus, energize on these two spaces. As banks will help create whatever required to make sure we are there to support them in their expansion plans. But my key advice is, if you want to really be successful as you move into 2021, focus on e-commerce and focus on how you can gain market shares through the domestic spends, and be part of it, because that's where the growth is, and that's where the growth will continue as we go into next year. That's the key advice I would give.
I was going to ask you about that on e-commerce as well, just a quick follow-up question, because there was a time when perhaps the UAE and the Gulf in particular kind of lagged as far as e-commerce was concerned. There were concerns about no unified address system and all that sort of thing. But now it very much feels that e-commerce is here. It's here to stay and grow. And it's not that once we get into the COVID world, the bricks and mortar side of it will just replace e-commerce again, and everything will reset back to the way it was. Do you feel e-commerce is here to stay?
For sure. Yeah. I think once. Always humans are always find it difficult to change. So going to a mall versus shopping versus going online and shopping is very different. Doing your banking face-to-face in the branch versus doing your banking online is very different. And many who are in a comfort zone don't like to change out from the comfort zone. But I think what this crisis has shown us is we were pushed to adapt to a new world. And once you adapt to a new world, which is more convenient than what you were comfortable with, you will always stick with it. You will never change from the new world that you've learned into. It's like kids, right? Today, which child doesn't know how to use an iPad? But back in the day, they were 16, 17, 15 who would learn how to use a phone. But today, the age of 3, we're seeing kids who know how to use iPads, know how to use technology. So the world is evolving, and I think as humans, we evolve over time, and each generation will be smarter than the previous generation. That's a fact of life, and I don't see e-commerce disappearing. The only thing that can make e-commerce disappear, if there is something new which comes out, which is going to be more convenient than e-commerce. But I can't imagine what that would be, to be honest.
Well, from personal experience, I can say that my wife is simply not struggling with e-commerce. She's definitely supporting the SME sector. Neelam,
just to add, I think also from the address system, what I've also noticed is there were a lot of new areas in Dubai or in the UAE where street numbers weren't there. Sometimes villa numbers were not there, but you have that Makani number, which almost every building, every apartment, everyone had, and that's basically made it so much easier to get things delivered to your doorstep. I think Makani is one of the for the setup in terms of delivery is one of the best innovation that was created here, and just made life easy. I think everyone memorizes Makani. It's like your postal code now.
Neelam, as an online retailer and an online business, I'll ask your thoughts. Going into the end of the year, again, what are your preparations for the end of the year? What advice would you give to other businesses out there as they go towards the end of Q4? And when you look at your annual report, what's it going to say for 2020?
Oh, well, you know what? It's going to be a very, very, very good annual report for 2020. But then there are a lot of businesses who suffered. I know personally so many businesses who had to shut down, and it was sad to see them go. But I think my main, my vision is for SMEs to learn from this is prepare yourself. I always say this, and I again repeat it, prepare yourself for the worst, because you don't know what happens, in 20. Like when we started 2020, I was so optimistic that this is the year we are going to be invested. We are going to be in 6 different countries, and, but then what Marwan said was we are actually seeing a lot of spend locally, so my focus this year was, UAE is doing good. Let's go out. Let's set up other countries and let's grow. However, pandemic made me grow further here and make this more stronger. So I would say get your base stronger and then move further. And what we're preparing ourselves is to expand our offering. We don't only want to stick to cosmetics and makeup and hair care. We've got into a lot more new categories. As we talk, we're having men's, kids, health and fitness. We're going to have holistic. I've also seen a massive uptake on holistic approach to a lot of people decided to go into holistic wellness, so we're going towards that as well. So we'll have a section for holistic wellness as well. So yeah, my vision for now is to grow the company horizontally. We're growing vertically, but let's grow horizontally, add more categories, add a lot more in offerings, because when you come onto a website, you want to be able to shop and you want to increase the basket size. So that's our vision for 2020 and 2021.
Scott, advice for clients in Q4. I mean, 2020 seems like one of these years that we should never take anything for granted. We've seen second lockdowns coming in the UK and in Europe. What's your advice for Q4 and your clients as they look ahead for 2021?
So I'm a CPA accountant. So ordinarily, we're very numbers driven. So I would say if anyone's got Q4 results to review at the moment, congratulations, you're still in business. It's been a tough year. And as Neelam said, a lot of people haven't made it this far. So anyone, no matter how bad it is, if they're still in business, then I think they've done a pretty good job. Yeah. Judging on performance-wise, is it good or bad? I mean, if you were judging against 2019, very difficult to try and compare. If you were judging against your 2020 budget that you made probably this time last year, again, very difficult to understand. So I know a few people have had issues with this when it comes to, say, company valuations, when they're looking at maybe a purchase or a sale, and they're trying to work out how to value a company and what do you do with a year like this insofar as the numbers. Do you normalize it against what you've had as a trend? Do you just draw a line through it? So I think that part is quite tricky. From a client perspective, I think what we've seen is a lot of clients putting in a lot of that hard work throughout the year of making their business a lot more efficient. So where I said that, previously in the good times, they probably weren't paying as much attention to every little detail. I think people have been working more on the business than in the business. And I think that's hopefully made people in as good a position as they possibly can going into next year. So if they've, cut away a lot of the dead wood, they've minimized any sort of expenditure that's really unnecessary, and they've really streamlined, they've got their, those that have sort of moved across to online have made that transition and actually not just set up an online shop and said, congratulations, we're there, but then gone back and actually made sure that they've got the right logistics providers, the right payment gateways, they're getting the right rates on things, and really streamline that process to make it as efficient as possible. I think that's really the message that most people, we're trying to get across to them. And I think most people have taken it on board. And it seems to be that that's the position that they're into going into next year with a fairly optimistic outlook, I would say.
Well, we'll kind of finish there. My final question to all three of you would be just to give me your final sort of download thoughts on 2021. So we'll finish on an upbeat note. But equally, are there any pitfalls perhaps that businesses should look out for in 2021? And Marwan, can I start with you? Your thoughts briefly about 2021. You've talked about confidence and optimism so far.
Yes, so I think 2021, my main advice to everyone will be is it's still volatile. It's not going to be it's not going to be as rosy. It's not going to be a straight line road of recovery. It's going to have lots of ups and downs. We've seen it happen in Europe with second lockdowns in certain places taking place. So whilst we have optimism, whilst we're seeing good improvement, that's not just a straight road ahead. Make sure you're well prepared for any volatile situation. Make sure you remain efficient. This is not the time to, again, increase expenditure and expand with no proper business foundation. Be very diligent, be very cautious. While there is optimism, leverage the maximum that's out there, and we wait and watch and see how things improve as we go into the second quarter or the second half of 2021. But my main advice is, if you have survived so far, it's very good. If your business has improved, it's excellent. If you're looking much better than where you were, that's even better. But make sure that 2021, do not get too overconfident. It's still a volatile road to recovery, and in that volatility, anything can happen. I think the business community, like I said, have all come together. We're all supporting each other to make everyone be as successful as they can as we come out of 2021. But it's not the end of the road. Let's make sure we all come out of this stronger than ever and be very well prepared for the volatility that's ahead of us.
Neelam, agree with that? Don't get too carried away in 2021?
I've only got two things to say. Firstly, go back to your business books. Let's go buy the books. Let's go back traditional way of doing business. Go back to your business book. Second thing, exactly what Marwan said. Collaboration over competition. We need to collaborate and work instead of competing with each other. Even with your business partners, make them your partners, make them your real partners, and work with them. And I think we are all heading towards a good side. What I really liked is man became man's best friend. We all started supporting each other. I could see, when we would send out shipments, we would tell the customer, please expect some delays. And the customer was okay. The customer was very happy. And, so I think what we really all need to do is collaborate with each other instead of competing with each other. And I think we can make it a very, very, very successful and a very strong comeback to 2021.
Scott, finally with you, and as you're the final person to speak, the pressure on you is to make everybody smile and feel good about 2021.
Excellent. Okay. So I absolutely echo the sentiments of Marwan and Neelam. Definitely cash flow management. Everybody needs to plan very, very carefully. Plan for the best, but also plan for the worst. You know, make sure that if things don't go as planned, that they've got contingencies in place and they don't overextend themselves. With that in mind, though, I would also suggest, and I strongly suggest to people, constantly be looking for new projects and new things. Anyone who's still in survival mode, they are falling behind if other people are moving ahead with new ideas and new projects. So always keep one eye on survival, but one eye on any opportunities. And as Neelam said, make sure that you can quickly capitalize on them. Don't take too long, otherwise they may pass you by and you're just going to be a Me Too product rather than one of the people out in front. Also, for those businesses that are looking to maybe expand in the market, there's definitely a lot of talent out there at the moment. So I think definitely keep your eyes out for maybe some additional resources should it be necessary. For those companies that have cut back on their staffing to try and survive this period, what they need to be very mindful of is that as, or hopefully business conditions improve next year and there's, talk of a vaccine and, confidence is improving, that if the market conditions improve, you're going to have additional customers coming to you. And if you do not have the resources in place to service those customers, again, other people are just going to pass you by. So either get ready to, increase, get ready to outsource where you can. And also another point, to try and make sure that there's a lot of advice out there in the marketplace. There's so many people willing to help out, to give you a few minutes and give you some advice. So definitely speak to people who maybe can help. Maybe you can get some people on as non-exec directors who want to give you a bit of advice, guidance. You might be an expert in your field, but growing a business through a very difficult time may not be your expertise. So definitely ask people. The worst they say is no. The best is maybe they help. So that would be my 2 cents.
Great. Well, that is it from the first session of the Arabian Business SME Forum. I'd like to thank my guests today, Scott, Neelam and Marwan, and I am looking forward to my commission check on the deal between Neelam and Marwan. Stay with us in the SME Forum for our second session coming soon, which will be on marketing and how we can use marketing to find new audiences and new customers. But again, it just remains of me to thank my panelists one last time. Gentlemen, thank you very much. Neelam, thank you very much.
Thank
you very much indeed.
Thank you for having us.